we have been on a journey in terms of impact. For those of you that are fortunate enough to receive any one of our grants, you will also get access to something that's called Emerald Impact Services. And Sachin and I, particularly Sachin, has spent a lot of time looking at Emerald Impact Services and the way that they view how we create impact. And one of the purest forms of impact is seen to be when we actually do research with a partner where we actually co-create the research agenda. Because if you work with that partner to co-create the research agenda, you can then define together the outputs and the outcomes, the supporting metrics and the ultimate KPIs. But of course, we as researchers don't always have that opportunity. Many of you have already done fantastic research that perhaps you've done by studying things backwards, and you're now in a position to be able to share some of those insights. Interact itself is a collaboration between manufacturers, industrial digital technology providers and academics who are working together to solve the issues arising from the diffusion of IDTs. Now, essentially, the way we're set up is that that what we do is ultimately, to begin with, it is the social scientists, the academics, that provide the insights about how we could help either IDT providers better get their technologies adopted by manufacturers, or by manufacturers to adopt those technologies in a better way that's going to lead to better outcomes. So better sustainability, better productivity, better happier workforce, and so on and so forth. And if we can get lots of firms adopting the technologies and improving those outcomes individually, then they collectively will then combine so that we actually improve the UK economy. So this is an investment. It's a £4.4 million investment that's made as part of the Made Smarter Innovation competition. Made Smarter Innovations got invested about £147 million in total, as so we're one of those centres. And we really are about helping Made Smarter think about the future they want to create by beginning to influence mindsets and approaches to change management for Industry 4.0 and beyond. So as I was saying, most of you on this call, we're not offering money for you to necessarily start today on finding an industrial partner and co-creating a research agenda, which is perhaps the most purest form of how you could create impactful research. But we very much recognise that in the research that you will have done today, quite often by studying exemplar cases or looking at exemplar data sets, you have pulled out what we call insights. And what an insight is, it really describes, I suppose, they're more the descriptive, it's what. It will tend to tell you what you've seen. It's that sort of first level of analysis. And it quite often might be generalisable, but only to a specific case. But quite often, I think you'd be fair to say, I review papers for my field. Sometimes I don't even really understand the papers that I'm reading, and I'm an academic. Some of the stuff just goes a bit over my head, and I'm just not quite sure about what its relevance is. And what we're looking for is from the work that you've done to date, so this is existing research, particularly the research that's got a human, and when I say human, it's a social science dimension, that you can think about. If you were given some further sum of money, unfortunately it won't fund people's time, but it can fund the production of outputs, that you could turn that from an insight into an actionable insight. And essentially, an actionable insight is your academic papers at the moment will be full of insights. An actionable insight basically helps to explain how you could do something based on that insight. So it turns the insight into an action or a response. It helps us to understand why something is happening and how to take action. And they need to be relevant, specific and valuable to the target audience. So, for instance, myself, there's many of these that exist now, but way before Industry 4 became really popular, one of my industrial collaborators, Tata Steel, said, we've got a concern that our board is only really looking at Industry 4 in terms of technology in manufacturing, literally what sort of technology they could add to make the manufacturing lines more productive. And we think there's so much more to it than that. And actually, through an MSc student project, this was when I was still at Warwick at WMG, the student started to look at what could those other dimensions of Industry 4 be, and started to develop it into a questionnaire that they could use internally. Now, at the end of that MSc, we then worked with a legal firm, Pinsent Masons, and with a consultancy, Crimson & Co, to turn the bones of a tool into a diagnostic tool, which became our first Industry 4 readiness assessment. And this was way back in like 2015, 2016, before this was a thing. And then we managed to get some seed funding, which came from my own Industrial Collaborator Forum, to turn it into an online diagnostic tool. And that online diagnostic tool is now referred to in a British standard guidance note. And one of the things that our tool was recognised for was being broader in its scope than many of the standard Industry 4 tools. And you can still go to the website today. In fact, I can drop it into the chat for you to see. And that just started from an MSc project, but has gone on to be something that's referred to, as I said, in a guidance note for a British standard. And that's because we turned it into something that was useful to the end user, something that was useful to industry. Now, this is our second time launching this fund, because the first time we called it a impact accelerator, which I think confused everybody, because many of your universities might have impact accelerator funds and they do something slightly different, because they do sometimes still fund research or help you build connections with people. We're really looking for you to find those bits of research you've already done that you know are pretty good, but that you don't have the money, because quite often it's difficult to get money for impact, to turn it into something that provides that actionable insight for one of our end user audiences, which are manufacturers, industrial digital technology providers, or policymakers. So we want to, so last time we put out a call, and we had 2 responses, but unfortunately they were for research bids, not actually for actionable insights. And so there was a missed opportunity to fund people. We really want to spend our money because it's quite time consuming to keep having to run competition calls. So we would really love you to apply. Interact grants at the moment have quite a relatively high success rate compared to normal grant applications. And given that this is a bit more bespoke, I think if you follow our guidance and really have a way of creating actionable insights, I can't guarantee success, but I think there's a high likelihood of success. So what we need you to do, we kept the proposal really straightforward. It's about giving us just an objective, telling us how your proposal supports one of the objectives of Made Smarter. We want to know who your proposed audience is, and that needs to be one of our 3 audiences: policymakers, manufacturers, or industrial digital technology. But in particular, there might be specific people you're trying to target. So in manufacturing, for instance, if you're doing something linked to the future of work, you might be after the HR managers as opposed to just the general ops director. And what we're also interested in is how you're going to connect with them. So when we say product, this is very much in the marketing sense for product. Your product could be anything. It could be a diagnostic tool. It could be some kind of video. Who knows? It might be a play or a piece of art. But what we want to know is what actionable insight you'll be providing, and what is the format, and what's the benefit that you will get from it. We also need to know a little bit about the platform, so how are you going to distribute it, what channels and tools. So we tend to use quite a standard approach of usually using a webinar to launch something, but you might have a face-to-face event. But quite often, to have longevity, you want your tool or report to be hosted somewhere. That could obviously be the Interact pages, but perhaps there's somewhere else within your own university or other networks you could host it as well. Also, push. How are you going to get your actionable insights out to your target audiences? What activities do you have planned? And again, we have Will, our Marcoms manager for Interact. He's absolutely superb, and he can help you push it out, but you need to have some ideas for Will to be able to work with you on. And then the pool part is just a little bit, how will we know you've been successful? It's really important not only to show that you've created an impact. And the great thing about these grants are they should be really good for your own careers, because one, you'll get a little bit of grant funding, which in social sciences, even a little bit of grant funding is good. If you think about a British Academy of Management grant, they're only £10,000. These grants are almost twice that size. But the second thing is, it's so important these days to show that your research has impact. These might not necessarily become impact case studies. This is a different way of showing impact, but this will be really, really good for your own career development to show that you've managed to take some of your research where you've developed good insights and actually been able to create bigger impact by turning them into actionable insights. So the call opened last week, the week before. The Q&A sessions today, as we can see, and the call doesn't close until the 21st of April. So that's to just take into account. We've got half term, we've got Easter and things like that. The earliest project start date's July the 3rd, and the latest project end date's the 28th of June. All I would say is that if you do submit a grant, one of our criteria is that you have to accept our standard terms and conditions. If you can imagine, this is a huge amount of work administering small grants for Loughborough University Research Office, and it's also a huge amount of work for Angela. So you really do need to make sure that your own research office is on board and that they will accept the standard grant terms. That is part of our criteria as you submit. So as I say, I think there's huge benefits to you. It could really amplify the impact of your research in a demonstrable way. It's great for your CV to have some research funding. You will get access to the Emerald Impact services. And as I say, I think they're very, very good to give you an overview of different approaches to achieving impact. We will then do an induction workshop focused on impact. And you will get support from Sachin and from Will, our impact and communication managers, to help you support your pathways to impact and your comms plan. So what's not to like? That's the impact. That's the Actionable Insights Fund. It's now over to you guys to ask any questions. I can see a hand, so I'll go in order. So the first one is Saul.
Hi, Jen. Thank you very much for that presentation. I was wondering about the collection of data and whether there's an emphasis placed in the call documents on demonstrating impact, and even more specifically on the kind of income. And I was just curious as to whether you would incorporate that into the data collection process. Would you fund that as well, or is that something that is done through Emerald Insights and through other kinds of mechanisms? Because obviously generating those kinds of data can be costly in and of itself.
What sort of data are you talking about, Saul?
Well, I'm just thinking, if we provide actionable insights to a company, obviously we want to know what's the actual action and what's the impact. So I'm thinking, well, it would be great to be able to collect data from that company. They may not want to or be able to provide it specifically. It may be quite soft in terms of what are the impacts. If you're doing, as I would do, some sort of communication training intervention, for example, it's a skilled job to collect that data. And it usually what I would do is put a research assistant on it. But if you can't fund people, then I'm curious, like, what are the expectations around insight? Or would you be more comfortable with something like, okay, we'd like the directors or the managers to give testimonials or something like that, which is a softer kind of output?
So yeah, I think at this stage, I think it's a really good question, Saul, and it's one that actually everyone's always talking to us about impact all the time, and the reality is the real impact will hit down the road. And what I would say is, so say for instance you're applying for money to develop the training materials for that course. We might, at this stage, you might need to just do something like a VVox at the end of it to get the initial stuff. But perhaps you could build in maybe something that was more automatic. So I don't know, for instance, that you got them to say one thing they're going to do differently, and then 6 months later you emailed it back to them to see whether or not that they had actually done what they said they were going to do. but I think it would need to be soft touch rather than. But that's not to say that that's not then something you could look for other sources of funding with, say within your university for your impact accelerators or something like that, to be able to follow up. But this would be more for the money to develop that you've got this really great idea that you could turn your research into, I don't know, a 3-day masterclass, and actually we'd fund the development of the 3-day masterclass. Anna.
Hi, sorry, my question was probably very similar to Saul's actually, because it was around if you're not funding academic time. So you've kind of answered it there. So I guess that if the academics were sort of developing their ideas, whether it's into perhaps a toolkit that could be used within industry or the masterclass as you gave as an example, I guess they would just do that. They'd have to do that in their own time. or perhaps some internal impact funding, as you'd suggested, might buy them some time from a research associate or something to be able to deliver that.
Sorry. Yes. I mean, the other thing is, if you've got 18k of funding, I know it's not a lot, but to do external stuff, you might be able to negotiate something with your own university to maybe to pay for some hours of a PhD student. I mean, sometimes they can be the most flexible resource, because it can be hard to just get bits of a postdoc. I sometimes think that we forget that PhD students can work up to 20 hours a week paid, and so they're a flexible resource I've used. So yes, whilst we don't directly fund it, if you can say to your university, look, I've just won this, please could you provide me, because it may not be huge sums of money, but for instance, but the other way around it is, if you want to develop a diagnostic, so part of the reason it's around 18, because I know you can go to a web developer and essentially give them your stuff and they can develop an online diagnostic for you for that, about that amount of money.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think we've got a PhD student that's kind of working in this space, so that might work quite nicely. Thank you.
Ahmad.
Good morning. My question, I think you've partly answered it with the last comment about getting a web developer to do something. My question was going to be about what you can spend the money on, because you've said what we can't spend it on. So what you just said, I guess we can contract out things like developing apps, videos, etc.
Yeah, it's just not, we can't, I get confused with the whole categorizations, but we can't directly fund researcher time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But is there any restrictions on what we could spend it on?
I try to keep it legal, Ahmed. That would be quite good.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't, not that I can, I'm trying to think of something that we could, within the realms of contracted out, we want people to be creative. So it could be that you are commissioning someone to, I don't know, do an artwork, or you're going to host an event at we did one at the Coventry Transport Museum, or I think we want people to be creative and wacky.
Yep.
And this call's a bit different, because if in doubt, then contact us, because we want to fund projects. So this is perhaps, whilst this is a competition, Sachin, how would you describe it? Where it's a bit more of a.
I'd say it's if you have an idea, definitely get in touch with us, and we will help you develop it. So the part of the application process, I don't feel that if you have questions, do get in touch with us, and if there is something that we can help you with, we're more than willing to go through that with you. So it's important to keep in touch with us, as Jan says.
But this is slightly different, because we know it's slightly more difficult. It's slightly co-developed. So we want you to be successful if you can be successful.
Yes, definitely. We'd help you in the development of your case.
Can I ask? There's someone else with a hand up. Can I ask another question, or should I?
And then we'll go to Linda, as long as Linda doesn't mind.
Sorry about that. I thought Saul's question was very interesting, and it raised in my mind the question of what kind of impact you are expecting. And I know Sachin will chase people to get impact, but within the scope of this, you're looking for something to be done within 1 year. What kind of impact would you expect to be demonstrated now and in future?
So that's what's critical about these. So the things we're getting hammered by ESRC and SQW are at the moment is the reach to SME, to manufacturers, to industrial digital technology providers and to policymakers. So the first thing that we want to show is that you have targeted one of those audiences and engaged those people, and you could sort of, with the right GDPR things in place, demonstrate that you've done that. Realistically, it's quite hard to then quantitatively demonstrate the benefit, but what they'd perhaps be looking for is if you could find any way of just capturing how they might have started to use the insights from the day or whatever from what you've provided. But maybe if you could, we can't force you to do this, but it's good for you anyway to think about, are there mechanisms or easy ways you could follow up maybe 6 months later just to see if there's anyone that's really run with it. And then I think just let us know who those people are, because what SQW will then do in terms of their assessment of Interact, they'll do a more detailed case study with that person. So, you know, like in a way, it's like a dandelion clock, isn't it? You could develop something that maybe 30 companies come to an event and they all say they're going to do something, of which maybe 10 of them do something, but it's quite small. But one of them, it really inspires them to do something differently. In a way, if you did nothing other than say at the end of this event, that, you know, 30 people committed to do X, 10 of them 6 months later had done Y, but this one company had really run with it, and now we've got a new collaborator, or and that would be sort of ideal. But we don't know that's going to happen, do we?
Thank you. Thanks.
Linda.
Hi, thank you. That was a really useful information session. I'm actually asking a question on behalf of my collaborator who's not in the UK. I'm just wanted to know, can non-UK folk apply to this or not? No,
we're a bit, unfortunately, we're a bit, but however, they could be, as long as, so would they work with you, Linda?
Potentially, yeah. So as a co-I, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. So as long as they didn't mind it being led by your university that was UK based, because and the output was based out of your university that's UK based, there's nothing to stop it being co-branded, I would not have thought.
Okay, that's fine. So they can be named if they're just a co-I.
Yeah, but the bid would
but
need
not
to
the
come
lead
in through a UK university. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Would the could I check? Would the outputs be for? Do they need to be UK specific, or what's their involvement?
Don't know yet. It just sort of saw the call. I've been in touch with a kind of group of people I often work with, and it just wanted to know generally, rather before putting a lot of investment and thinking about it, didn't want to kind of do any thinking if then he wasn't eligible. So
to be fair, we're just
get in touch with us about that.
Yeah, to be fair, we're just about to launch Interact Global, which is the international aspect, which doesn't have money associated with it, but shows that we are actually interested in insights that are global. So say, for instance, you did develop something, as long as it's rooted in the UK, but if you were comparing to other populations in other countries, we would see that as being a positive thing.
Well, thank you very much.
Melissa.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. This might be a bit of a vague question, but could you tell us a little bit more about the audiences? So you said manufacturers, IDTs, or policymakers. So policymakers specifically for manufacturing, or?
Yeah, so if we think about it is a really good question, Melissa, because Sachin and I have been really as we try to really think about what impact is and actionable insights, we've been wrestling with this. So let's just think about what the government's trying to, or their sort of working hypothesis. In the UK, we've got lots of little industrial digital technology providers. Mm-hmm. They get frustrated because they get manufacturing firms either won't consider adopting their technology because they just think it's a bit too difficult, or they haven't got the money, or various other different things, or they approach them, they have initial sales meetings, but those sales meetings don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So from an IDT provider, they want to know things like, how can we actually get more manufacturers to use our technologies? Because if those manufacturers can, because then it comes into the second problem. Okay, so let's just assume we've now got the manufacturer to adopt those technologies. What we also know through the long history of literature around advanced manufacturing technologies is that those technologies aren't always adopted well. And if those technologies aren't adopted well, then you don't see the benefits. So what we then want to do is, how can we help manufacturers when they've made a decision to adopt a technology, adopt it really, really well, so that it improves their productivity, it improves their sustainability, it improves their resilience, and it potentially improves the well-being of their employees. Because if that happens in enough firms, then we'll start to see a benefit for the UK economy. Firstly, because we'll have a thriving industrial digital technology sector. On top of that, our manufacturing sector will be more productive, more resilient, and more sustainable. So I would say the absolute primary sort of audiences are those companies, the industrial digital technology providers, that are struggling to get their technologies adopted by the manufacturers. So perhaps they're looking for slightly different help, because they're looking for help to, I suppose, improve the adoption by the manufacturer and to understand how they could, what could help them get their technologies more adopted. Probably the most primary audience are the manufacturers, and those insights that could help those manufacturers to either make a decision to adopt a technology, or those insights that help them adopt that technology well, so that they see the full benefit. The way in which policy could feed into this is perhaps slightly secondary in some respect, because essentially policymakers intervene when there's a market failure, and so we'd be trying to influence policymakers if we had some insights that showed why there was a market failure and why a change of policy could help either the IDT providers make more IDTs or sell more IDTs, or there's a market failure that would help the manufacturers adopt the technologies more quickly. But the thing to bear in mind is manufacturing is just a context. You guys may have done research, I don't know, in healthcare, in services, in NGOs. You might have done some research in a totally different context that links to technology, and that research could be transferred into a manufacturing context. And in some respects, that's what we're really looking for, is how can we do some of that transfer of knowledge from other domains of the social sciences and help them be applied in a manufacturing context.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. I didn't know if I was.
God, no, that was a very good question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure, my answer was very good, but it was a good question.
No, very helpful. I didn't know if I was coming into a very specific call, but I think actually you've made me realise it's not specific in that regard at all. So thank you.
And then Saul asked a question, which is, so he's put in chat, you can ask as many questions as you want. Yeah, use can be on multiple bids, but you probably don't want to be PI on multiple bids. And I'm sure that we tried to write this bid so that there was less like gumph, you know, less stuff you've got to wade through. So we may therefore not have been as specific about all of the eligibility criteria. We're taking a slightly more structured but structured flexibility approach.
And we are, oh yes, we have one more question from Yun-sun.
Yeah, hi. Yeah,
Hi.
It's a little bit similar question to Saul.
Yeah.
So I am in the project funded by Interact at the moment.
Yeah.
And I can, with the team, I can apply for this.
Yes, you can.
funding
Yes.
as well. Yeah.
Yes.
But is it possible to apply for this funding with 2 different projects? That's not possible.
With 2 different projects, would you be the co-I on both of them? Sorry, the PI on both of them?
No, probably definitely one I will be just quiet.
Yeah.
The other one, not sure. Yeah.
Yes, you could be. Yes. Yes, as Jan says, as long as you're not the PI on both of them, that isn't an issue. But what we can do is just clarify that and then get back to you on that one. But as far as I know, that's not an issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Right. Yes, she's back. That's great. You're muted, Jan.
Apologies, I lost the internet.
Yeah,
very bad
yes,
timing.
we had a question from Yunsun, who is already has been awarded money from Interact, but she was wondering if she can apply. Sorry, do you want to go ahead and?
So, Jan, it's similar question to Saul. So I'm currently funded by one project, and I'm just a COI. Therefore, I was asking whether with the same team, whether we can apply for this funding.
You can, and
Yeah.
parts of what we thought may happen is that people get the insights out of their first project, and then they could use this funding to turn it into actionable insights, because most of the research projects will just stop with insights rather than necessarily actionable insights.
Yeah.
But that won't, you'll just be treated the same as any other application, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so this focus will be very much the impact and actionable insights. Yeah, and is it possible for me to apply the actionable insights funding with another project?
Yes, as long as it does.
Time.
Well, I wouldn't apply for two with you as PI.
No.
Because we would like to try to spread the money out. But if you are PI on one and CI on another, that's probably okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's everything. As I said, though, this bid is slightly different. It's a slightly different call. It has this slightly more collaborative element. And I'd just like to thank you all for your time this morning. And we look forward to some really interesting proposals. So thanks a lot.